All right, everyone. Welcome to the Mission 300 podcast, 2025. This is the first episode that we are recording in this brand new year. My name is Jason, here with Caleb, Brian, and David. And we are kicking off a brand new series that we are calling the How-To series. And it is a bit fitting. I'm sure everyone's already figured out their New Year's resolutions. And we wanted to get you a bit of a head start on not being a failure at them this year. And so we're starting what we are calling the How-To series. And the whole point of this is to give you guys some tools and to learn ourselves and figure some of our lives out ourselves on how to set your trajectory so that you'll actually move towards your goal instead of this burst of short-term motivation where you get really active and you do stuff for a short-term time and then you return to your default setting. And so there's a couple things we want to go into on that, but I kind of wanted to give this example, and maybe you guys can chime in on your thoughts on this. I know, Caleb, you had something within the last year that really made this stand out to you. The biggest cliche possibly for New Year's resolutions: I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to be more healthy. And we were talking about this before we were recording this episode on the right motivation. Are you trying to stop doing something, or are you trying to start doing something because it's actually what you are? It's actually what you want to pursue. And a lot of people will say, I'm starting this resolution. I'm going to go to the gym. I want to be healthy. I want to eat better. But that's not really what they want to do. What they really want is just to not be fat and not be unhealthy. And so it's not that they're pursuing health. It's not that they're pursuing fitness. They just don't want to be something. And it doesn't take long for that motivation of, well, I don't want to be this anymore to run out, because at some point you return to that default setting of, I'm okay with what I am. And therein lies the problem, because if what you are doesn't change, then your actions aren't going to have any long-term difference. So Caleb, you had something you wanted to jump in on that, which I thought was really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. This is Caleb, by the way. Hope you guys are looking forward to 2025. I know I am, with some different perspectives and everything. But I definitely resonate with the whole New Year's resolution. I think there's a lot of people out there stronger than me. Like, I think every year I'd be like, oh, this year I'm going to hit the gym, and I'd last about 1, 2 days max, and then I'd be done with it. And I think, like you said, Jason, it wasn't that I was motivated to get somewhere and have an objective. I just didn't want to be where I was anymore, which just turns into like a whole mess of back and forth. And I never understood the whole fitness thing before last year when I completed the Appalachian Trail, which required the most amount of physical effort I've ever put into anything in my life. And it kind of changed my perspective, because on the trail, it wasn't about the physical aspect, but it was about, I want to complete this goal that I have. And so the physical aspect was just one of the quote unquote mountains that I had to get over and go through to actually get to where I was going. And I think that's completely changed my perspective on fitness, eating healthy, even things like reading books or staying educated. Like, it's like, oh, I don't want to be unknowledgeable. Like, in conversations, I don't want to be uncomfortable where I don't have as much knowledge about this, or I don't want to be uncomfortable when I'm around people and we're at the beach, because I feel like, I don't have a quote unquote beach body. Not that that matters, but there is a part where you're uncomfortable. And I think that was the difference in the goals, actually, was I always wanted to be comfortable and not be uncomfortable. But I didn't realize you just have to choose your uncomfortable, because you're either going to be uncomfortable working out every day and eating healthy and not choosing to indulge yourself in food and different stuff, or you're going to have to be uncomfortable in the fact that you're overweight and you're not healthy and you can't participate in physical things as well as other people and enjoy other aspects of life. And so I think it just never registered in my perspective. And to change that, I just, had to just start out doing something and go for it. And it had to be a bigger goal than just, I don't want to be overweight and unhealthy. Like, that wouldn't have gotten me through the Appalachian Trail. It was too hard to just have that as my reason. So I think that's how a lot of people, that's how I have always started out my New Year's before this year of, oh, I just don't want to be overweight and unhealthy, or I don't want to be this, or don't want to be this. So I'm going to try and do something to not be this anymore, but it's not enough of a reason to just not want to be something because you just don't want to be uncomfortable. And you're going to be uncomfortable trying to become something that you're not comfortable being, anyways. If that makes sense.
Hey, this is Brian. Welcome back to 2025. Caleb, what changed for you on the trail? So when you're making this decision, obviously you took on the trail and you had to go do it twice because you hurt yourself in the first year and then had to go back and redo it. Were you even thinking about fitness, or was that more of a byproduct that came later? So what was the anchor point that took you to a change of paradigm?
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about fitness. And that was also, I mean, that was a huge consequence because I probably wouldn't have gotten injured the first time, which led to me having to go back for a second time. It just wasn't like, and the crazy part is like, too, I knew it was important. Like, I knew to say, like, oh, yeah, yeah, like I'm getting ready for the trail, blah, blah. But in my head, I was like, oh, I can just willpower through it when it comes time to do it. And even honestly, the second time around, I prepared a little bit more, but I don't know. There was still something missing in my head that it was just like, I did not realize how physically taxing it would be. Because, like, the second half is where it just gets brutal. The first half prepared me for that, luckily, but I think the big paradigm shift was realizing, okay, one day if I want to come back and do a trail again, like I have to stay in this shape physically so that way if I want to drop it all and go do something like this again, or if there's something in my life that requires me to do something this physically challenging, I want to be prepared. I don't want to have to, like, this is what I want my lifestyle to be. Like, I want to be able to go hike 20 miles on a weekend to go see things that the average person wouldn't be able to see because they're not going to hike 20 miles in a day. Like, there's just things that I wanted that were more important than how I felt and me wanting to sit around all day. And that's like translated to everything, I think, because it's like, okay, if there's something I want to do in the future, I want to be capable of it. So what do I have to do daily to make that a reality for myself? And I think that was the big change. It wasn't like I want to be healthy because it's a good thing to do, and I don't like the fact that people would think I'm unhealthy because then it shows that I'm lazy and shows that I don't care about stuff. It was just like the complete mentality shift of the purpose of it all.
Next week, we're going to be going into the how to want to. So after this podcast, the next one's going to be how do you even want to do something different like this? But I want to kind of come back to what you're talking about because as we're getting ready to set our objectives and our goal, I was going to ask you, David, like when you're thinking about what do you want to be, because you've done this several times, whether it's been fitness or learning guitar or some kind of event, you tend to be someone that I've looked at that, wow, you say, I want to learn this. And then by the end of the year, you've learned it or you've done that. What are you setting for your year or kind of the direction? And why are you picking that? I've started a lot of hobbies and a lot of things. I've gotten into running, weightlifting, music, programming, and a lot of different disciplines. And a lot of these disciplines, like for example, guitar, I never really just spent a bunch of time just learning scales. So I don't think I've actually gotten like super great at guitar. I've just kind of learned the fun stuff and I really enjoyed that aspect. So it didn't really feel like a something that I had to force myself to do. But other things like running and weightlifting, I kind of realized that I have to set myself a real goal. Like, for example, in running, I had a friend and it's just like, okay, let's run a marathon. And that was a solid goal. We had our training plan. And really, the objective is to stick to this training plan for 16 weeks until marathon day. And for weightlifting, it's like, okay, my goal is to work out 6 days a week every day, every week for however long I can. And then now my New Year's resolution, because it's like, okay, what's my kind of goal here is um, I found Sylvester Stallone's my same height, and then I want to get to his 175 pounds weight, um, and his percent body fat and stuff. And so that's my goal. It's like a physical goal. And now I just have to plan how I'm going to get there. And I found with especially hard challenges like my marathon, or I did a 75 hard challenge, which is more 75 soft, but I found a friend that wanted to do it with me, and we both did it and we both held each other accountable. And that accountability with a friend, it developed such a fun relationship with that friend. It develops such a strong bond with that friend during this time where you're both going through something and you both message each other each day that it's like, oh, today was a really hard day. And what we kind of did is we kind of had our chart, because our goal isn't to get the objective, that's the goal, but our goal is to stick to the plan every single day until we get there. So the days that were especially hard, I found was kind of fun to put like an X if it was a really hard day, and then a dash if it wasn't very difficult. And you have all these X's that you've done in the past to kind of encourage you. This is what you've done in the past to get to here, and you're going to throw all those X's away. And you'll find that over time, the X's will start turning into dashes. And so those are all the little ways that I've found to stick to doing hard things.
That's something really interesting that I think this is great for every listener and for all of us. Your daily thought process wasn't on the big goal. It was on the rhythm or the discipline of the day. That was actually where all of your focus point was. And not what I'm not going to do, but what I am going to do. So if you say, I'm going to read so many books, I'm going to, whatever that list is, that becomes your driving force. And I think this is really interesting, is what you just described is also how high-end athletes or high-end performers actually train. Because like you get into high-end anything, take a runner, for instance, their whole training is about how to breathe different, how to stride different. So when they're running, they're thinking, their focus is on a detail of how they run, not I'm going to win the gold, I'm going to win the gold, I'm going to win the gold, because they know if they may have an opportunity for that, but if they don't have this mastered, that isn't in reach. So their focus is on that daily rhythm. I thought that was very insightful. Jason, what is it like? And I'm kind of putting you on the spot here because this is really challenging. You got a big family. You also are running a business. You're also an associate pastor, and you have all these hats that you carry. When you're thinking about what you want to be or what you want to do, how do you create a daily rhythm that goes around that when there's so much change and things taking place in your home and in your life? How do you do that, or what are you looking to add that in?
Well, that's a really easy question to answer. Um, a lot of caffeine helps for one, and it's a blessing that I've been able to build up a tolerance to coffee, because that really makes things a lot more bearable. But one thing that's really helped me, especially in the last couple of years, is understanding that the purpose behind the things I'm doing. So even with some transitions that I've had in the last couple of years, as far as like running a coffee shop, to whereas before working in an industrial manufacturing plant, two completely different worlds. But because I could understand that they were both part of the mission, it wasn't something I resented, and it wasn't something that I was looking for a way out on. And the same thing with family. I'm a big believer in, when you become a husband, lean into being a husband. When you become a father, lean into being you're able to lean into them and understand this is part of who I am. This is part of my mission. And same thing with business or pastoring in the church or outside of the church. This is part of what I am, and I get to do this. And that whole phrase, well, I get to do this. Sometimes people use that as like, well, don't say that you have to do it. Say you get to do that. And sometimes you can mentally trick yourself with that, and that's great. But there does come a point where if you don't actually see the thing in front of you as part of the mission and part of who you are, part of your development, then you're going to resent it at some point, no matter how many tricks you try to play on yourself. And so that was the biggest thing for me, was this thing in front of me here is part of what I am. And it's not always fun. A lot of times it's hard work and it sucks and it feels very, underappreciated. It feels like everything in my life is just pulling at me and needs something. But knowing that this is part of the mission that God has for me, and it's not a mission I resent, it's actually what I want to do, then each day becomes more of a, I don't know, I guess a flow in that. So it's like, we're training today. Okay, cool. Training sucks a lot of times, but look what I can do after I train. It's like when you guys, like Caleb with you in the trail, and David running your 7,000 marathons, and Brian, you running your 10K now. It's not always fun, the physical downside of it, but there's an exhilaration to it too. And so that's my long-winded way of saying, because when you understand that you're pursuing what you are, then it's a lot easier for the body and the mind to come into alignment with that. And we've talked about that in previous episodes, where it comes to the spirit, soul, and body aspect of who we are. And I think if we don't look at those as three competing things, then it's going to be a lot easier to hit goals and maintain things.
So how do you choose your priority, Jason? Because you're talking about leaning in. So you've leaned into being a father, you've leaned into being a husband, you've leaned into being a pastor, you've leaned into becoming a business owner, you've leaned into becoming program leaders for your kids' stuff. So you've leaned into 9 things now. So it kind of looks like your tree has all these bends in it, if you're a tree, per se. How do you become good at one? Like what do you do this year to better yourself, to be those to facilitate that?
Well, one's understanding the priority level, and being okay with your priorities not being everyone else's. So if I've got my marriage, my family, I've got the ministry of being a pastor, I've got the business, those all can't get all my attention at the same time. And I have to decide to tell those things, you're not getting my attention right now, different times. And that's okay. It's not always easy, but you have to be okay with some branches being thicker than others at some times, if that makes sense. But understanding the ones that you don't give up on, because I've seen too many people, for various motivations, you neglect the marriage branch because I'm focused on this and this and this now. And then that becomes a problem. Or you neglect the, hey, you have kids that you're a father to branch, and that withers after a while. And so, with the caveat of don't do that because those are incorrect things, and understand the other branches are there to support the branch or the main part of the tree. And then, like I said before, a lot of caffeine, because you'd be surprised how little sleep you actually need.
So what are you implementing this year that betters those things? If I was someone that's trying to learn, how do I manage all this stuff because I feel stressed and I can't give myself to this, and yet I'm supposed to take care of my body better. I'm supposed to, when do I even have time to read my Bible besides the quick Twitter posts? How do I get all this stuff done when I have all these responsibilities and you're responsible for that? How do you not make those responsibilities become the weight on you and it's extracting from you versus you giving to it? At some point, you have to have something to give to it. How do you develop yourself where you can give to that? And you said something about setting healthy boundaries, but there's sometimes your job will say, you got to come in more. At the same time, your pastor's saying, hey, I got to have you for this. At the same time, your wife is saying, hey, when are we getting our date night? And then your kid's saying, Dad, you're never home. So all of those hit at the same time. Now, what do you do? So I'm kind of hitting it from that perspective of what you've learned to develop in yourself to have the fortitude to say no and to say yes and to man, because somewhat you got to be stable to order to handle that. So that's kind of the question I'm asking you.
Well, and that's probably the biggest thing, at least in my experience so far, is at some point you're saying no to one of the things. If you have a dozen things pulling at you, you're going to be saying no to some of them, either actively by telling the people, no, I can't do this, or passively by not being home. That's saying no to your home and your family responsibilities. And one thing I had to do quite a while ago was intentionally kind of, it's a change of mentality, I guess, where I'm going to start saying no to this thing, and it's going to cost me. It's going to cost me time with this person. It's going to cost me this status. It's going to cost me this friendship. It's going to cost me this time over here. Because when I say no to this, that is going to start to wither. And there was actually a long time ago, I had to do this with some friendships with people that I'd had for many, well, more than a decade at that time. And this was a long time ago. I'm trying to be a little bit vague and non-specific to, one, not give away my age, and two, not spoil anyone else's secrets. But there's, guys that I had known since college and high school. And we kind of had this, you have an established relationship dynamic where, you goof around a lot and just kind of everything's a joke. And I remember there was a time where I realized, like, this is not what I am anymore. I can't keep this. So the decision point for me then was, I'm saying no to these things that we do that are not serious, that are not beneficial, that are not helping me to grow. It's keeping me immature. It's keeping our friend group immature. So I'm saying no to these things now. And I ended up losing those friendships because of it, because I would just not be that person anymore. And so when you do that, you get invited to things less, you get included in things less. And I had to be okay with saying no to that and letting that go. And I've had to do the same thing professionally at times as well, where it's, especially in our culture, it's common to be like, wow, look at that person sacrifice time away from their family for the business. That's noble. It's not noble. It's in some situations it's wrong. So being okay with saying no and knowing that the backlash you get from letting those things go doesn't change who you are. And that's something that we've talked about a bit on this podcast before, because if those things have a sway over how you view yourself and how you see yourself, then we're having a different conversation.
Okay, so this brings us, thank you, Jason. That was great, because that kind of brings us back into this initial question that we were talking about, is the not saying I'm not going to do this anymore. Like, your whole goal is I'm not going to do something, like I'm going to go to the gym so I'm not fat. But you're really not wanting to go to the gym. You just don't want to be fat. So there's not a drive that holds you into those places. And Jason, you kind of said it. Your letting go wasn't, I need to be more mature. I don't want to be more mature, but I need to be more mature. So I'm not going to be around these immature people. But deep down, you're wanting to be around those people. You just know you shouldn't be that way. Instead, you saw what you are, you saw what you needed to be in order to advance in life. And then that became the sacrifice that needed to be let go in order to step into more richer things and into more improved things. But you saw some kind of hope in that. So, Caleb, you saw some kind of hope in completing the Appalachian Trail. So, in all the pain of the early journeys till the end, you saw some kind of hope. And in the example with David, we always use the marathon, but there's just hundreds of different things. He has a hopefulness that, hey, I'm going to get there, but the journey of it. So focusing on the training becomes almost more of the focal point versus the end goal. The end goal will take care of itself, but mastering the dailies. So you kind of explained all that, Jason, in that from a relational human development point of view. So looking at this new year, what are some areas that you are considering adding that would bring out more strength of you, of your inner man, your makeup, your physical structure, in order to best handle what you're doing in life? So how do you look at that going into this year?
One of the things for me is when it comes to relating with people, whether it's ministry or in our business here, or even with my family, is being the active initiator in the direction. And I guess what I mean by that is this: I used to kind of think most people would take initiative and take action if given the right opportunity. And I don't really think that's the case for most people. I think the vast majority of people want and need to be led. And so being the active initiator in leading people and leaving less things open to, well, what's the group think? Well, what's everyone want to do? For example, we had a new person start at the shop this week. And so we're going through their training, and there's a couple of people that have been there for a year or 2 years that are great at training. And my initial thought was maybe just kind of let those people do all the training because they've been there, they know what they're doing. But as I started thinking about it more, it was I would see that play out, and people don't take the initiative to train others. And so there had to be some kind of active moment of, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it, and now you're free to go and run it. And for me, that's one thing I'm really focusing on this year, is being that active initiator in leading and in where we're going and how we're getting there.
How do you develop that every day in all areas of your life? What's like, can you break that down? Like, I'm going to run a marathon, because that's really what you're saying, because it will be strenuous to do that in every area. How do you train every day to make that a part of your life, where it becomes natural in the big events, but you're deliberate in the small ones?
A couple of things that I found are working for that is, if I have the goal of, I want my kids to have the Bible on their mind, to be in the Word, and that's a good goal, and every parent has that goal. If I get them a Bible and say, okay, here's your Bible, go, they might read it occasionally, but am I directing them in that? A real simple thing is, here's a verse of the day, read it during your school, because my wife homeschools the kids, and so they're home during the day, they've got their books, they've got plenty of stuff to read. Am I directing them in what to read? Here's something from the Bible that we're going to study. Or am I just leaving it up to them, like, hey kids, here's a Bible, flip to some pages and see where you land and read that, and maybe it'll stand out to you, maybe it won't, maybe it'll just confuse you because you landed in Deuteronomy and you're 8 years old, whatever. And I found that really helps. And that just, even that small amount of quote unquote leadership helps to spark so many new things.
I think for me, the thing I realized on the trail, and then I realize now, is having the mentality shift where I act as if I am already that thing that I want to be. And not because it's like naive, like, oh, blah, blah. But like, if we take the example of David running a marathon or me hiking the trail, like, I think a lot of people on the trail would be like, oh, when do you get to call yourself, the big term is a through hiker? Like, you're doing the whole Appalachian Trail. And there's people like, you don't get to call yourself a through hiker until you hit the last day and you're on the last mile. Like, when do you get to call yourself a marathon runner? Obviously, it's when you run a marathon. Do you get to call yourself a marathon runner like 13 miles in, when you're halfway in, or like at what point? And I think on the trail, maybe it's different because it's a little bit more long term, but it was like, okay, I am a through hiker. What would a through hiker do every day? Okay, well, they would walk this many miles with an objective in mind of they want to get somewhere. Okay, I may not have run a marathon yet, but what would a marathon runner do? They would train like this, do like this, because they are a marathon runner. And then the day the marathon comes, you just act out what you are. And so I think for me, that's my big mentality shift for this year. And specifically, that's being a healthy person. And so it's like, normally I would be like, oh, yeah, to be healthy, I just don't eat junk food. Don't look at the junk food. Don't think about soda. Don't Don't think about that fast food burger. Just don't. And then I thought about not thinking about it so much that that's all I think about. And so the mentality shift is, oh, I am a healthy person. What does a healthy person do? Okay, yeah, I would love to grill that steak tonight myself. No, like unnecessary additives and crap like that that are all in the food, like making food at home. There's no point in me eating out because what's the point of that? I'm a healthy person. It's like it almost makes the desires for these things, sure, they may be there in some ways, but it shifts the mentality towards like, well, that's not part of who I am. Even if you're on day one, I think that like sets you up for success because you're not trying to, like we've been saying, run away from this thing. I'm just acting like I already am that thing. And the thing is, you will not look like that thing in the beginning. Like that's what made the trail so hard. For the first probably, I mean, Brian knows, the first probably like half of it, I was like, I am not a hiker. Like I was comparing myself constantly to all the other hikers who were really like already elite level. Like they're pushing 20 miles a day. I don't know, see this person one time and they're like, all right, my name's Speedy McGee. See you later, man. And I was always like, oh, I'm just not a through hiker. Like I'm not cut out for this. This is not who I am. Blah blah blah. And I would have like I would have never obtained that goal. And then it was just slowly becoming that thing because I did it every day, the daily grind. That wasn't easy. And it was the mentality of near the end, it was like when I got to the last third, it kind of started becoming a reality because I was like, wait a second, I'm getting so close to being done. I've been worried about being a through hiker this whole time, and I've missed out on all the things the through hikers get to enjoy on the entire trail. So I think it's like if you can get over that hump right in the beginning and say, okay, like I'm going to act as if I'm a marathon runner this year. What would a marathon runner be doing on the daily? And I may not like look like that, but if I can be pushing towards that, like for me, it's definitely the health thing. And that's how that mentality has helped so much because even though you may not succeed like in every little thing, you're not like giving up once you quote unquote prove yourself wrong. You're still pushing forward because you're like, okay, well, the thing I just did wasn't really who I am. Like me just eating that like burger at a fast food place, okay, that wasn't really who I am. I need to get like back into the mentality of who I really am. And so shifting back into that makes like the little bumps, you know, not not objective ending or goal ending because you still have this mentality of, okay, I'm becoming who I am and acting as if I am that thing. And I think that's even like the mentality you see of like Caleb and Joshua in the Bible when they're like, go and see the giants in the land. They're like, of course I'll use that example because the name, but they're like, well, they know God has given them the land, even though the reality looks different. And so they're like, well, God's given this to us, so we can go take it. And the other spies are like, no, 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 there's giants there, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's like the difference in mentality for our lives is, and to other people may seem naive.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have to have a reality check because you don't want to just say you're that thing. And I can give a million caveats to that. But like when you get it, it makes sense, and when you're actually being that thing or not. Having that mentality of, okay, who am I? And I should act that out because that's who I am. And anything that I do that's not that is simply not who I am. And so I just don't do that.
The picture of with the other spies that came back said we can't do it. They said we see ourselves as grasshoppers. We are grasshoppers on our own site. In other words, they couldn't see themselves more. And for the listener, it doesn't mean, oh, I'm a marathon runner, so I'm fast. No, you may not be fast. We're not talking about whether you're winning a medal at it, but you're able to step into doing the thing, the actions and the daily habits that will make you something. And David, I ran that first 10K, which is the first thing I ran in my whole life. Like running was just like a foreign thought to me. That's why I played goalie in high school. It really had nothing to do with because I thought I was a better goalie. It's just I didn't want to run. And so I became very good at it so I wouldn't have to run. But David taught me something of focusing on when we were training for this 10K, which I kind of got bribed into doing that I didn't want to do. So I had to go change my attitude about it because I didn't want to do it. And I kept saying I don't want to do it, but I'm having to do it. And it's like, no, I got to go get this right. I want to do this. Let's shift the mentality. But then when David said, just focus, this kind of indirectly, but through conversation, watching him and learning from him of how he trained, just focused on your heart rate every day. Just run your heart rate. And I think this has a metaphor that's much bigger. We run our heart rate. Like you're on the trail, Caleb. You can only physically go as far as you could physically go. So you manage what you could physically do, but in time of the dailies, pretty soon what you could physically do today was a whole lot more than what you could physically do at the beginning of the trail. Because things begin to change. You start losing weight. You started understanding more things. You had start understanding how to take care of your feet. And I think this is such a great picture because in the 10K, if I managed my heart rate, I would get to the goal because it's just about how can I endure the whole thing. And just from the first time I ran it in a test run to the end was a 10-minute difference. And my heart rate never changed for the whole thing. So is for the whole race. And I think this is really important in the picture when we're setting up what we're to do is if we take your idea, Caleb, not your idea, but the truth of that, listen, I'm going to go do this. So I need to be that person. You're not comparing yourself to another marathoner. You're not comparing yourself to another thru hiker. You're comparing yourself to you. You're a thru hiker. Now, what are you going to do with it? So you learn from other people and you create daily habits. So what you did every day was far more important than what you accomplished in 10 days or what you were going to accomplish in the future. It's just what you were doing that day. And I think there is this kind of an idea that I want to be something. And we're trying to say, when I get there, now I can say I am that. And that really is an external fake motivator. Who are you saying that to? Who are you proving it to? So none of this real change takes place in proving something. But it does take place in saying, God, you've given me something. You've given me a physical body. You've given me these opportunities. You've given me these things, these areas of life to improve in. What am I doing with it? And if you can give it to me, you can trust me with it. So I need to develop it. So now we can see why Hebrews chapter 12 says we lay aside the weight and the sin that ensnares us, and we run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him, he endured. So in other words, we start seeing a joy in how we run each day, and we push ourselves. How much more can we do? What can we develop? How much can I improve in that area? But you don't go beyond what you could do that your heart can do. Because once we push our heart, we get worn out and then we crash. Now we don't want to run anymore. But if you can keep your heart at the right pace, you will start getting faster, more improved. You'll start getting better.
My goal spiritually for this year is to every day have my mind on God all day. And that's it. It's just one sermon series, The Power of Imagination, and it really just kind of puts in perspective that like most of the people in the Old Testament and the New Testament didn't have a Bible as accessible as we did. So how did they become so spiritually mature? And I think generally it just comes from the idea of having your mind on God all the time, 24/7, whatever you're doing. And even if it's in the back of your mind, if you don't get the time to get your 40 minutes of or 30 minutes of devotional time that day, it's like, yeah, but I was still with God all day and I still had this relationship with God. And I think that's more important than the devotional. So that's my goal for the year.
That's good. Real quick plug. David, that you said there was a sermon or a series on the power of imagination you listened to.
Yeah.
Who is it by?
It's
In case
by
people wanted to
Andrew
look it
Womack.
up.
So a couple thoughts that really stand out to me in this podcast was, number one, the change of pursuing something bigger so I can become, to I am, and then working what you are every day to an improvement level, because you know it will produce something. So you don't have to worry about what it produces, you know it will. So you can just be that in your everyday. The other thing is, like Jason, you were talking about, you showed kind of the character changes, the character goals that you have implemented to be an initiator. And so now we have kind of our soul and our mind being set forth in a goal process. So we were talking about physical goals, we're talking about soulish goals or mental goals. And then we have the spiritual goals, which David was talking about. And I think this is really important, is all three work together. And some people say, well, our physical body is kind of the, from a Christian perspective, is really our problem. So we just focus on developing the spiritual. And I think we're a little naive, because we're supposed to renew our mind. So our mind needs to conform to what our spirit is saying. And then our mind dictates what our body's going to do. So in the reality, if you're not really working all three, now granted, the one is the most important, is your spiritual, because that's the eternal part of you, and your soul, but your physical body is going to be changed. But the reality is, the mastering of your physical body produces a strength inside your spirit man. So we're creating that. So when we're talking about setting goals or pursuing a dream or pursuing something, we're pursuing it because of what's in us and what we are, that we're just bringing out, versus trying to do something so we can become. And that idea has to be changed, because if you're trying just to become something, you will really never let go of the gravity of what you're trying to get away from. But if you already are something, you can grow out of the gravity of what was holding you back. And that can be kind of a fertilizer. The manure that you're in now can be a fertilizer to the growth of where you're trying to go. But it's from the inside, from our spirit man, that grows to the out. Spirit man, renewing the mind. The mind tells the body, this is what we're going to do. And all of a sudden, your hope and your direction changes. If it's an external motivator, we can be inspired by things. But if it's only to be that, if I am X, Y, or Z goal, then I will have arrived. You will always find yourself trying to get, you'll always be trapped by the gravity of the thing you're trying to change. So let it come from the inside. Think about all three parts.
All right, we're going to wrap it up with that. I just want to leave you guys with this one thought, because I know from experience that it can make you a little hesitant at times when to chase after something, when you realize what you're going to have to give up, especially when you're accustomed to those things. And the little metaphor that came into my mind is, we have a really nice garden here. We have a couple acres in the country, and I love this garden. My wife and my kids and I, we all work in it, and we'll grow a variety of different things. It's been bonding for our family. It's been really good for us all. And it's just a great little garden. And if someone told me to dig up my garden and to destroy it, I'd be like, no, you're stupid. If someone told me there are gold bars buried underneath your garden, I would have a lot less hesitation of ripping that dirt out, because I understand that what I'm digging after and what I'm going after is so much more valuable than the things that I have to leave behind. And so I hope that helps somebody out there, because if, when you realize what God has put in you and you focus on that, then it really doesn't matter what you have to let go of. It's not that worthwhile in the first place in the long run. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. Here's to a great new year. Until next time, keep the faith and stay in the fight.